Welcome to a slightly belated Week in Sports Cars podcast, brought to you as always by the fine people at Cooper Tyres and the equally fine, if not at sometimes even finer people at the Justice Brothers. Slight delays here with logistics with myself, Graham Goodwin, coming back in from Suzuka and suffering what can only be described as dramatic fatigue, and that clashing with Marshall Pruett and his need to actually get moving for Portland for IndyCar this weekend. That means that not unusually of late, I'm joined not by Marshall, but by my partner in crime on Daily Sports Car and with Racer.com, Stephen Kilbey.
Hi Graham, I can hear the collective groan from all the listeners already. They're not even listening yet.
You join us actually, having just arrived at one of the world's most extraordinary hotels. I'll describe that in a moment, as we're approaching the track action for the weekend for the season opener for the FI World Endurance Championship at Silverstone, also double heading with the European Le Mans Series. We're here at a hotel in it's known as the Monaco of the Midlands at Milton Keynes, based on a grid system just like New York, and it's absolutely completely exactly the same as New York in every possible way. Not. And this hotel, extraordinary by the fact that our view out the window is actually of a football stadium, and I mean the inside of a football stadium, the MK Dons, a team with a fantastic history and hated by everybody in Wimbledon, which is closer to where I live than we are at the moment. Stephen, it's been a busy day. Before we get into questions, we'll have a quick chat about what we've been up to, but let's start with what you've been up to, and some material to come on the Marshall Pruett podcast, we hope very soon. A very different bit of in-car indeed to come. What have you been up to today?
I spent time at a circuit which I didn't know still existed, which is Rockingham Motor Speedway, which stopped hosting races at the end of last year. Was it early this year? Certainly very recently.
Yeah, very recently.
I expected to turn up there
rubble.
It to be rubble. It to look like Donington when they tried to convert it into a Formula One circuit recently.
Or Snetterton at any point.
Yeah, or Snetterton at any point. But actually, it's in remarkable nick, and the circuit looks fantastic. They've done a rebrand. Everything's functioning kind of as normal. They're just not running races there anymore. So from what I understand, it's been used for track days and corporate days and all sorts, so it's still getting used. And I was there for an announcement that happened this morning, which was the fact that Brabham Automotive has partnered globally with Goodyear tyres. So this is another arm of what Goodyear's doing in its return to sports cars and racing. So yeah, I had a quite bizarre experience, something I didn't expect to be doing a couple of days ago, which was being driven around Rockingham on the national circuit on the infield by David Brabham in the BT62, and I have got in-car audio, which is going to be fantastic. I can assure you, everyone listening now is going to want to hear that thing. It is an absolute beast.
Fantastic stuff. I mean, we do know that the Brabham will be, this is the BT62 of course, will be coming back to racing at the Brit Car Night Race. It's not a top international race, but good to see the car going to be getting out there with this Goodyear association. But the bigger news came when you had the opportunity to talk not just to David Brabham, but also to the marketing guy from Brabham Automotive as to what it is they're looking at. Now, the last time we had Brabs on the Inside the Sports Car Paddock podcast was back in February with me at Bathurst, where that car broke the outright lap record, the official outright lap record around the mountain. Brab's telling me then that the Brabham Automotive brand's racing aspirations indeed do focus around GTE, or did focus around GTE, but not with a BT62. The car that will follow that will be a more road-focused car, but slightly different answer. And a very different answer in one regard, a slightly different answer in another regard you got today.
Yeah, so I spoke to Dan Marks, who's the commercial director at Brabham Automotive, and he said that since the hypercar announcement in June, they're kind of not... I think it's safe to say that what he says about GT, what Dave Brabham said about GTE and them evaluating that still stands. They're still looking at GTE, but they are in fact now doing a full evaluation of hypercar prototype.
With the BT62?
With the BT62. So he wouldn't tell me much about this newer model that you alluded to, the fact that the one that...
Might be the BT63.
It might be the BT63. Because we'll hear about that before the end of the year. He can't tell me how much we'll hear about it, but we'll have some news soon about that. I think At the moment, they're just having a little bit of a look around a bit of everything. They seem to think, after having a look at the hypercar prototype regulations, that actually fits the BT62 more than they were expecting. I don't think they're going to do anything to do with hybrids, certainly not now. That's not on the agenda. But in terms of moulding that car into that set of regulations, they seem to think that they could do that. Whether it will happen or not, I don't think they know. But they're certainly seem to be, and they're interested. And you know what David's like. He's a fellow that is really determined to do this. He's
an Energizer Bunny of a character. Very, very keen indeed on this revival of the Brabham name into track, into a car and into track action, and now into racing. It's going to be interesting to see. As for the rest of the weekend, we're now welded into press rooms across Silverstone, 2 different pit lanes in use, 2 different paddocks in use. It is a feast of entertainment if you're trackside. It is pure torture if you're actually working this race meeting. We've got the new look 2019-2020, aka Season 8. You'll be hearing a lot of that moving forward for the WEC. We've had a chance to see that grid with some new look cars and a couple of very nice new looking cars, some drivers that it's great to see back, a couple of late changes to the lineup in the WEC. We've got the ELMS, always stunning, and a couple of pretty major changes there too, in particular in LMP2, where we're seeing a couple of teams edging away from Ligier and edging towards Orica, with United Autosports with their WEC Orica, and the first of what will now become 2 Oricas in ELMS. We're seeing the transition for United Autosport away from the Ligier JSP 217 in ELMS and to Orica, with the 22 car this weekend will run as an Orica, and by Spa both of them will. Panis Barters as well, transitioning to a new chassis for one of their 2 cars. And LMP2 I think will become the next big question. What is going to happen? When is it going to happen? 2 exciting looking grids. I think 2 interesting looking races in prospect, including the shortest ever official timed race for the WEC at 4 hours for Silverstone. So we've remarkably got 2 4 hours of Silverstone, one on Saturday for the LMS, one on Sunday for the WEC. But aside from the professional pains that this one causes us, a couple of exciting races in prospect.
100%. It's going to be interesting to see what a WEC race looks like in the slightly different format, because there's a lot of drivers in that paddock who haven't raced on that format, and some teams as well. It's going to be slightly different strategies there, and it's a good opportunity, especially for teams like Porsche and teams like Team LNT who have got new cars here, to not have to go straight out there and do quite a long race. They can test out what the cars are like in racing environments without having to do an extremely long race.
I guess one of the bigger storylines in the week before we arrived at Silverstone is another change, a surprise change in the EOT, the equivalence of technology. If you want, shorthand is this is the way in which the performance is balanced between the hybrid Totas, the Gatling gun, if you like, in the knife fight that is LMP1, and those cars against the non-hybrid cars, and in particular that means been a further change in the weight. It means an extra 14 kilos for the Totas. That puts them, as if I remember correctly, 99 kilos heavier than the turbocharged LNT Ginettas, and I think it's 108 kilograms heavier than the Rebellions, the Gibson cars, 2 of which we've got this time around. That looks at the moment still to be a one-off, by the way, for the second car, and they've appeared in this pretty remarkable reverse black and white liveries, though I gather there's a further livery change due for the full season car. We'll wait and see. I think qualifying could be interesting, could be very interesting. We had the late change enforced upon Ginetta with Chris Dyson injured last weekend at Road America, but Ollie Jarvis is going to be a great substitute for him. Chris will be here at Silverstone, but damaged his wrist after a brake failure in his monstrous Trans Am Mustang, championship leader at that point and still very much in touch, and he's been told he's got to keep his wrist immobile. But he'll be mobile enough to climb on a plane, and we'll see him at Silverstone for the race on Sunday. But Ollie Jarvis champing at the bit, as he always is. You've got Team LNT Ginetta looking to make a splash. Qualifying is an opportunity to do that early doors. We'll wait and see what the race form is going to be like. The more proven package, of course, is the Rebellion. They've got a new look driver squad as well. And then, of course, the Totas with Brendan Hartley joining the team in a new look car. Some changes to the aero package there. It's a brave new world. And yes, a lot of the questions are around why weren't those changes made earlier. You might very well ask that question. But one of the things I'm particularly pleased to report we've seen change, and it came with this latest DOT, is that for the first time that I can remember, we've had an explanation from those that have made the change as to what change they've made and why. And that is all about giving the baseline that they're going to be happier with for the what do you call it? Well, we'll call it success ballast.
Success handicap.
Success handicap, whatever they want to call it, it's ballast. It's great. So, we're in a place where it's different enough from last season that we can honestly say we don't know yet. And that's going to be interesting to see whether or not, Toto has still got a massive edge. We expect them to have an advantage certainly in traffic, as they normally would do with the four-wheel drive system, but it's going to be interesting to see if that pans out in the shorter format race. They should not, if everybody runs reliably, and it's a big if, they should not be as far ahead for two reasons, principally. One is they're not going to be gaining time in the pit stops. Two is it's a 4-hour race, not a 6-hour race. And from there on in, it's a matter of what difference that weight, and it's quite a big weight difference now, makes between the three different cars that we're going to have to play with. And we'll wait and see what GTE looks like with the 3 factory teams now as opposed to the 5 we had last year. We've got a stronger, I think, LMP2 team. We've got a full house tyre battle in that, and GT&AMP looks great, with new cars, the Aston Martins joining, of course, the new look Aston Martins. It remains to be seen how this is all going to hang together, but I am looking forward to this one. It is always good to get new. It is always good to get things that are a little bit better, and this is, we hope, the final transition season before we see something altogether different with Hypercar. Lots of stuff going on in the background, not least from the likes of Brabham, but lots of things I'm sure to come over the coming weeks and months. We're going to crack on. We're going to be slightly light, by the way, this week on the IMSA questions. That's because I want to hang on for next week for Marshall to get his teeth into one or two of the questions you've sent us. We're going to crack on through the questions, and you're going to be the inquisitor this time, Stephen. We will, of course, chuck some of these questions to you as well, but just by the physical setup we've got here in this odd hotel room, we're going to crack on through those questions. So what do you want to serve up first? You want to go with Weck, Aslam, Zacco, etc.? Far away.
Yeah, it's that sort of weekend, isn't it?
It is.
Let's start with the WC. And actually, the first question isn't the WC question, it is an ELMS question. And this is from James Hewitt on Twitter, who says,
Hey, James.
What's the reason for Every Motors Porsche and the ELMS GTE class disappearing from the entry list of Silverstone? I don't recall reading any news articles or seeing any information about them missing the race.
Well, you know that question. You know the answer to that one, because I think you went down and had a chat with people in Porsche land.
Yeah, so this weekend they haven't been able to make it purely because they haven't been able to fulfil their full driver lineup. They haven't had a third driver signed up for this one, but I understand that they'll be back for Spa. That's their plan. They're just sitting this one out.
Oh, that's good to hear. I mean, there's concerns whenever you see a team drop off. GT Racing there certainly isn't cheap. BP Motors have always looked good. They've not had the early success with the Porsche that perhaps they were looking for, but it will be good to see them back. ELMS Racing in its pomp at the moment, but it needs that stability, and have sensed with the second of the Proton competition cars falling off as a full season presence, that maybe that might have been in doubt, but it's good to hear the EP Motors will carry through.
The Project 1 is another omission from the ELMS GT.
But I think that's principally, there's two things, isn't it? One is that Giulio Perfetti does not want to do double duty. Why should he? And two is I don't think they've yet got their third chassis.
It's just worth noting that. Second question comes from Chris Alfby on Twitter. He says, with the repairing of Guy Smith and Chris Dyson, get well soon, Chris, could we see Dyson Racing come back into sports car racing, in prototype racing again? Would love to see those two back in the top class in IMSA.
Well, I mean, Chris has made no kind of bones about it. This is a big adventure for him. It's a big challenge for him as well, but his form in the other racing he's been doing, some of the sprint cars and certainly in Trans Am, has been very good. Of course, there's the AER link. with Chris being in partial ownership of that company. And also there's a third, or fourth if you include Ollie Jarvis, and of course his link through Mazda, a fourth link with Peter Weston, the ex-Dyson Racing guy who's been doing time at AER since the end of the Dyson Racing programme, will be race engineering the number 6 car. So there is a bit of a family feeling about it. I'm sure that Chris would love to have a Dyson Racing programme back. I don't think he's in a massive rush to do that right now. They had a sniff around the potential for the Aston Martin deal that was kicking around, but I think the commercial terms of that were not suitable at that point for Dyson Racing. But I think they're in a position where never say never. And who knows, getting back into an international racing scenario for Chris might just relight that fire. Be interested in asking that question a little later this season.
Next up, a guy in a grumpy bear suit asks on Twitter, is there any news to report regarding the availability of the WC streaming service in the US? I don't mind paying for it, but the FIA and ACO seem to have some aversion towards taking US dollars. There's also been some questions in the last few weeks when I've been on, Graham, about the streaming service overall, what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've got more insight into that. Unfortunately, I was kind of unable to give anyone
I can tell you as much as I know, which is I'm certainly part of it. So it'll be the same team for the WC streaming service as we've had in recent years. It'll be Lou Beckett in the pit lane. It'll be Martin Haven as lead commentator, supported by Alan McNish and yours truly in the booth. It'll be much the same as we've had previously. I've not heard yet of any tweaks that are going to be made to that. As far as the US availability is concerned, that will be the Motor Trend On Demand service. The exclusivity arrangement they've got with that, I think, does mean the geo-blocking remains as it was previously, and we'll keep you posted with any changes that actually come into play with that one. But for the moment, it is what you had last season. There is a press release out and about, which I'll try and put into pre-race notes for DSC in the next couple of days, paddock notes for DSC, about where the broadcasting can be seen in the UK and across Europe. Eurosports, who will traditionally take their own commentators, and the motorsport.com platform, who will take the stream commentators, are going to be the major players there.
Daniel Peters on Twitter asks the next question. Says, what is your opinion on the ever-increasing number of Orica chassis at the expense of Ligier, Dallara, Riley and LMP2 in the WC? In theory, it could make the racing closer at the expense of variety of chassis, which was not the idea of the current regulations.
No, it wasn't, and variety, absolutely is the spice of this, and should remain that way. I think there's been a problem, and it'd be an interesting question to actually ask up and down the pit lane, particularly with our friends at Michelin and our friends at Goodyear and Dunlop, as to whether or not the tyre wars had a part to play here, whether or not actually, if you're going testing with development tyres year on year, where do you go? Well, you go to the teams that have been winning races, and for the most part they've been Orica teams. I think what we may have ended up with are increasingly tyres that suit the Orica perhaps better than they do the Dallara and the Ligier. So it'll be interesting to find out whether or not that's principally supposition, but I'm beginning to hear people confirming that may well be the case. That'll be an interesting one to see whether or not our tyre wielding friends will confirm that, and indeed some of the teams. It is a source of regret. We do like the variety, and it's a particular source of regret to see that happening mid-season for some of these teams. And I think it's now time for the rule makers to act. We've seen one round of the Jokers. It cannot be a good thing to get. We're not close yet to the point where we've got the next round of licences to be offered. We've already got a further transition that's going to have to happen with Hypercar, with the performance of the LMP2s realistically having to be reeled in quite substantially. That potentially offers an opportunity for a rebalancing moment. And then you've got the next licensing side. The problem is that's still some way away, and what we're seeing already is Dallara and Ligier's customer base beginning to look a bit crumbly at the edges, a bit more than crumbly at the edges when you're losing top teams like United from Ligier, and with the number of Dallaras having fallen off a cliff really. It's time, I think, for them to think again here. you've got manufacturers that have shown loyalty to a set of rules. They require a bit of support here, and I'm not really at home to Orica kind of screaming and moaning and shouting about it. They're more than dominant in this marketplace. They can afford a bit of competition.
There's another debate to be had as to what LMP2 looks like in the next couple of years, because the trouble is now is that we don't really know what the changes are going to look like, and that's not just us, that's manufacturers, that's teams, that's drivers. Nobody has an answer.
No, and I think, what I'd like to see as well is, and it is tricky while we're in these growing pains for hypercar, but I think that the step change that needs to come with the ACO in sporting terms and in terms of regulations is they've got to learn to actually deal publicly with more than one problem at a time. And that's not been very apparent. There may well be discussions in the background about what the future shape and the future performance for LMP2 can and should be. I'd like to hear a little bit more public discussion about that one. If you're looking to build a product, if you're looking to take an audience with you, then you need to involve them in, if not the solutions, certainly in terms of the direction of your own discussions. That's my view.
Another question from Daniel now. He says, do the LMP1 cars have to field 3 drivers in a 4-hour race, or can they just field 2 drivers, as is the case in GTE Pro? With costs being a major factor at present in all racing, would it not make sense to have 2 drivers in 4 6-hour races? Some drivers do 3 hours plus stints at Le Mans.
The answer is, I can tell you that some teams have considered running 3 drivers and have opted not, 2 drivers rather than have opted not to. But having named 3 drivers, they've got to run them. So if you've actually nominated drivers, at the point at which that's accepted, that what those drivers have got to run, I think it's a minimum of 40 minutes from memory in a 4-hour race. And if they don't, then penalties can be accrued up to and including exclusion of the team. So the straight answer is, once they've opted to go with those 3 drivers, and that can be for performance reasons, it can be for reasons of performance of the car, it can be reasons of performance of the driver, there can be all sorts of reasons why. In the case of a team like L&T, for instance, with the Ginetta, don't count out the fact that if you've got drivers that you want a good look at, that you might be thinking about using for the remainder of the season, every single moment in that car is going to be valuable. So actually it makes perfect sense to make sure that you have the opportunity to have data on as many drivers as possible if you're trying to mould something together. So far, remember, L&T Ginetta have only named these drivers as being for Silverstone, and a lot of that will be linked to their performance over the 4 hours.
John Foreman on Twitter says, is the upcoming WC season called a super season? I would like to think last year's was super as it lasted a year and a half. Also, what would happen if Marshall, Graham and Stephen did an episode together?
It would be, I think, a black hole would appear, and we'd all be sucked into it, and that would be the end of that. You'd be left listening to other, frankly, less really awesome podcasts, and that would be very sad for everybody. It's not called the super season. The change I think you're going to find is, I'm quite pleased about this one, although when I first saw it, it jarred a little bit, is I keep having to remind myself what this year is and what next year is. So it's 2019, 2020, but the decision has been made that it's going to start from this point being called Season 8. So Season 8, it's the 8th year of the FI season. So there you go.
That's the problem.
8th season of the FIWC, so Season 9, Season 10, etc. But no, it's not a super season. You're absolutely right. The reason it was called the super season is because it was more than a year long.
This is another John. This is John Richter on Twitter. Says, will we see a Ford GT in privateer hands take part in an IMSA or WC race in 2020? Graham, I really enjoyed your Rattel interview.
You know what? About the Rattel interview, I've interviewed Stefan before, but it's the first time I've had Stefan on tape for a full hour. That was during the Suzuka 10 hours. So, if you're listening, Stefan, thank you very much for being as generous with your time as you were, and a really open forum from Stefan. It's a format that I'm going to be showing to other major players in management positions in motorsport, and I think that's a format that really works. We asked some of the more searching questions, and I was delighted with the answers he gave me. I didn't agree with all of them, but I was delighted that he actually gave me the answers to them, and it was one of the interviews I've enjoyed most, frankly, over the last 2 or 3 months with Stefan. I'm pleased to say that. I've completely forgotten the question.
the first part of it was about the Ford GTs running in privateer hands in IMSA or WC.
Well, the only car we know that's in privateer hands, of course, is Ben Keating's car. Ben has committed to the full WEC with Project One. That means that we won't be seeing that car in the WEC this season. Might we see it in an IMSA race? We might. We'll wait and see what Ben makes his decision. I think the key to it, as he said before, is it's effectively he would need to run that car and the costs of running it. I hope we do. The cars are awesome. Am I confident we will? No. And by the way, the other thing I would say here is the fact that Ben has joined Project One means it's unlikely we'll see him running that car at Le Mans next year unless he attempts to get a separate invitation for himself, having earned an invitation with the Project One Porsche. So I think at the moment it's looking less like than ever that we'll actually see that car in the WEC and at Le Mans.
Mark Clarkson on Facebook says, what are your expectations for Aston Martin this season, both in GT Pro and GT-Am? We know the Astons have good single lap pace, but they've struggled to hang on to that during races. With the AMs getting the upgrade, how do we think they will fare?
I think it's a great question. I think the issue with Senior, and you've described it perfectly, Mark, is performance tailing off, and that appears to be kind of tyre related. I'll be honest with you, I'm not absolutely convinced about the wailing and gnashing of teeth that came on about kind of BOP. It wasn't a huge change for the team, and they seemed to tail off rather more than I would have expected them to at Le Mans. But could it be, as we've seen before, the fact that what you've actually got is, in this instance, a Michelin tyre that's been developed more for the teams that probably have paid for that development? Might be Porsche, might be Ferrari. I've certainly seen both those teams out testing extensively. It might be that again we've got into that position where that tyre suits the mid-engine car better than it does the front-engine car. It wouldn't be the first time. That was one of the factors that led to the Dunlop year that brought the title to Aston Martin Racing. So it'd be interesting to see what we actually see this time from them. They have been out and testing. We've not really heard much from them about what they've done about addressing those concerns about the stint-long performance. But let's wait and see what actually comes out. Do I expect this to be anything less engaging than it was last year? The answer is no, I don't. We've lost Ford, and Ford were consistently front runners in the WEC. We've lost BMW, who weren't. So I don't want to be kind of snotty about BMW's programme, but I have to say, it's not the first time I've said it, there's a word overwhelming and there's a word underwhelming. There isn't a word that's whelming, but that was what it was.
As for Am, I think the interesting thing here for the guys like Paul Dall'Anna and Sally Yolok is
there are no guys like Paul Dall'Anna.
There aren't. No. There aren't.
Paul Dall'Anna, by the way, is the only Canadian man that a bear daren't attack.
But when I spoke to, I think it was Johnny Adam, when they were first developing the car, going through the testing cycle before it first raced.
When you say you think it was Johnny Adam, does that mean you're not sure whether or not you spoke to Johnny Adam?
I definitely spoke to Johnny Adam.
Right.
And I believe it was him who told me that the big changes for him was drivability of the car, the cockpit, all the little bells and whistles that don't necessarily...
It's got bells and whistles?
Apparently it's got bells and whistles. That's going to have a bigger effect on AM drivers, isn't it, than pros? Because you've got Paul Dall'Anna and Sally coming from cars that were quite old, really, by the time they were retired off. It's going to be a big step for them, but we could see a big leap in what they're able to do over longer stints, longer periods of time and longer races if the car's more comfortable to drive and easier to and more consistent.
Well, here's the other point about that car. So remember, the car that car's been developed both as a GTE car and as a GT3 car. As a GT3 car, absolutely that car has been developed to be a more customer-friendly car, which means that you're designing that car and the drivability of that car for a customer racer, which tends to be a gentleman. So it's going to be interesting to hear from Paul, to hear from Sally, whether or not that's had benefits for them as they move forward, because we haven't seen that car race with amateurs aboard as a GTE car yet.
Mark Clarkson on Facebook says this is his second question. He says, How cool is the Ginetta fan engagement? Interacting directly with fans via Facebook, Twitter and Reddit and offering garage tours is a great way to get people on board. Hashtag me personally, I was already on board as an avid Yorkshire tea drinker. But do you think this could kickstart other teams to go to these efforts? I
absolutely hope so. And I will put my hand up and say yes, this is something I've been involved with, talking to Team LNT. In fact, I'll tell you right now, I made the calls to the guys who are going to be coming to the garage tours tomorrow as we record this, and on Saturday. And there's some very, very happy people coming along, and we'll repeat that with what's going to be happening through the season. I expect we're going to get fewer people. We get to Shanghai and we get to Fuji, but I think we'll get more than a smattering. And my guess is there'll be a big demand for it when we get out to Sebring, for instance. But look, I think anything fan-facing is a definite step forward. It's always been something that's featured for me as part of the appeal for sports car racing back in the heyday of the American Le Mans series with their For the Fans moniker. It means something. And I think that's valued by the teams. I think we've gone through a period, particularly when we had the 3 factory hybrid teams, when too many literal walls were going up. I didn't like it. I've never liked it. Too many literal walls were going up. I think we've taken a big step back at Le Mans in the paddock. It looks lovely, but it's an absolute pain in the arse to work with when almost everybody's got a plastic policeman behind a tensor barrier glaring at you whether or not you're entitled to be there. It's not what's required, and unfortunately that is the cost of the fact that once in a while the privilege of getting into the paddock is abused by people who can frankly nick things. We've seen all sorts of things go missing down through the years, and unfortunately that is going to be part of it. But part of it is, let's be blunt, a bit of marketing bullshit, and for me that's taken something away that was pretty special there. This is a small measure, but I think if we see what we've already seen from the response to the let's face it, very small initiatives that have been made here by Team LNT. I had a long chat with Lawrence Tomlinson about it. He said it's absolutely amazing how much goodwill that one little thing has actually generated. The fact that we will see on the rear of the 2 Ginettas through the season logos from some of the fan-facing resources on Facebook and Reddit. They're there because they are a group of people, tens of thousands of people, who are supporting that championship, and I want to see more of that. I want to see more of that from the championship. I want to see more of that from the teams, and I've already heard from at least one more team operating in a different championship that they'd like to do something similar. So fingers crossed we will see more of that actually happening, because there is actually literally no downside.
Well, it should be noted here as well, shouldn't it, that it's not just Team LNT that were really on board with this idea. The championship is as well.
Oh yeah, championship.
WC were really on board with getting this going,
and allowing some of the access that's actually going to be required to make it happen. So let's wait and see. It's early days. Team LNT have got a very, very, very steep mountain to climb this year, and they're about to find out how steep. Going quickly in testing is one thing, going quickly in qualifying is another thing, going quickly over 4, 6, 8, 12, 24 hours is another thing altogether. It's a good car. Let's see if it's a great car.
Third question from Mark. He wants our opinions.
More from Mark?
Yeah, I know.
Greedy.
Snuck in 3 questions.
Greedy.
He says he's basically asking how close we think the privateers can get to the Toyotas in the first race of the season.
The best thing about this, I have absolutely no idea whatsoever, and that's really good. I mean, look, make no mistake, publicly and privately, I was hugely critical of the artificial gap that was allowed last year. I think that took away from the racing. I think it cost us the SMP racing effort at the end of that season. I think people are regretting that now. I hope what we're going to see is cars remarkably close in qualifying. Remains to be seen what happens in the race, and that's not just to do with equivalent technology. It's to do with the way in which that performance is delivered. I think we could get to the stage where actually, even if Toyota were penalised to the point of, bear in mind, if Toyota come and win, it's going to be worse than the next time because there's going to be more weight.
It may be that throughout the season, that's when we really start to see this come to effect. It could take 2 or 3 races.
We could see that. But even if Toyota get to the stage where, in pure performance, the potential individual pure lap time falls below what Rebellion and what Team LNT can actually produce, the way in which that performance is delivered could actually end up with this being quite exciting. You could actually see, get to the stage where, you know, a Rebellion or a Ginetta could be quicker on an individual lap, but when you get into traffic, that's when the Toyota's ability to punch through it, I don't mean literally, but I mean punch away from it, could actually send the balance in the opposite direction. We don't know yet. I hope that's what we're going to see.
Kind of an extension of that question comes from Kiwi Tajong on Facebook, who's asking specifically about the weight on the Toyota. And I think what would be good here is to ask you, off the back of this question, whether you think adding weight is the best way to balance this. Because there are obviously plenty of ways that you can go about trying to balance hybrid and non-hybrid cars. Is weight the answer, do you think?
The problem with balancing hybrid cars is the way in which the package has been designed, and it's to do with, you know, weight is problematic for the hybrids. Bear in mind that, you know, the way in which the hybrid energy is harvested is through the energy through braking, for instance. And that means that those braking systems operate on a bit of a knife edge. Remember what happened in 2015 with the Nissans, where they didn't have the hybrid system, but they had a braking system designed to operate with the hybrid. What happened? No hybrid system, the brakes overheat constantly and dramatically. So you've got to be kind of quite careful with what you do. It's the same with the aero. The whole concept of that Toyota is that you save energy by lifting and coasting. If you mess too much with the aero, it won't coast. It won't coast in the way that it's supposed to. So what you've got is an incredibly efficient aerodynamic package that is designed to allow the car to accelerate, to punch out really quickly, get to its peak speed really quickly, and then keep as much of that speed as possible, even with the foot off the gas. And, you know, we've seen that time and time again, where the Toyotas and previously the Audis and the Porsches will punch away from traffic like nothing else on earth, and then all of a sudden, as you're getting further down the main straight at, let's say, Shanghai, let's say Fuji, that the other traffic is able to actually start to catch, in some cases even past those cars. So it's going to be a tricky one. Weight, I think, it's a blunt instrument, but actually it's an easy one to understand. And that's what I want to see more of, by the way. I want to see more that is done in these instances that is easier to explain and to understand.
We've got Asian Le Mans Series themed question here from Buddy Campbell on Facebook. It says, am I the only one who doesn't get everyone's obsession with the Bend Motorsport Park in Australia? It reminds me a lot of Miller Motorsport Park in Utah, just some turns in a field with no character. It's like a Tilkedrome, but Herman Tilke didn't design it?
Well, number one, not seen it yet. So all I've seen is pictures of it. I know people have been to see it. I know the Asian Le Mans Series management were there last week for the Supercars round. You know, what I'm hearing is some pretty good reports about the quality of the venue, about the quality of the track, about the quality of the environment. Look, we'll call it as we see it. I think the only reason, bear in mind, no international race has raced on the full circuit yet. We have seen some of the other formats of the circuit actually used, but we've not seen, for anything at any kind of level whatsoever, the full 7.7 kilometre track in use. We will call it as we see it. I will see that track for the very first time in January. I'm going to go out there a day or so early to get a good opportunity to look at it, you know, absolutely closely. While I do a track walk in 42 degrees, you've got to be out of your mind. But I'm hoping that we can get one of our safety car drivers and a couple of the pro drivers to take us for a look around it, hopefully with a cooling drink or 9. But I'm looking forward to seeing it. Why? Because it's new, because it's different, because it's something we've not been to before. And I'd say, just by the way, this, and it's not by any way a criticism of the opinion being offered there. I have no criticism of that opinion. If you've seen it, then fine, you're entitled to your opinion about it. But Stephen, you've been doing this with me now, with Daily Sports Car and with Racer, for some time with the international racing scene, particularly the WEC. Isn't it nice when we go somewhere different?
It certainly is. We do so many of the same journeys over and over again. And sometimes it's to the most incredible places, like a place like Spa, for instance, which we've mentioned once times before, that we seem to almost live at.
I would rather kill myself right now than go to Spa tomorrow.
Yeah.
Now, not because I don't like Spa. Spa's a great circuit, but it's 3 of the most boring hours from the tunnel to Spa. That is like creeping death at 80 miles an hour.
What people want to see out of the Bend is the fact that it's long, it's a challenging circuit, it's a circuit that nobody's properly raced on yet, like you say. All the drivers and teams that are going to be there at that Asia Le Mans Series event are going to lap up the opportunity to try something completely different, all be in the same boat. Could throw up a really interesting result, because
I'm hearing
it's not there's not even going to be much in the way of sim data for that circuit or anything.
No, absolutely.
So preparation is literally just practice, and I'm sure there might be a test day or something beforehand. Is there? Did they do it in Asia Le Mans Series?
We do have a test day.
So
yes.
they'll just have to run as much as they can, and that's something that engineers, drivers, everyone relishes.
I think it'll going to be interesting to see what happens with the season entry. It's going to be interesting to see what happens for the entries for that race, almost as a standalone, as to what support it gets from the Aussie racing community. We're beginning to hear what the shape of the grid for the whole season looks like it might be. That's looking quite exciting at the moment. There's been some very good news. There's been some slightly more average news from one or two other teams, but I think we're going to have a great grid of prototypes. I think we can have a reasonable grid of GTs from what I know in the background. I think we're going to have a goodly number, probably the best number we've had for a full season in the Asia Le Mans Series.
Fabulous.
If things come together. But, the world is a rapidly changing place. But, look, I hear what you say. Let's judge it on its merits once people have raced it.
Shall we go to General? Let's do that next.
We're going to do some. Should we do some IMSA?
You want to do IMSA?
Let's do a couple of IMSA.
Okay.
Let's see if they've got any IMSA questions that won't get us a pounding from Marshall for answering when he wanted to do it. There's one. I think there's one on Junkos Racing. You could certainly answer that one.
Yeah.
Because I know you've been speaking to people in DPI land over the last couple of weeks for a couple of pieces. And by the way, a couple more pieces to come on DPI, on DSC. Which I know Marshall's working for some stuff around 2022 and beyond on DPI as well.
Yeah, so we'll start with that one, as you mentioned. That one, that's from Mitch Mortensen on Facebook. Says, do we have any updates on Junkos DPI program? I didn't see them at Road America. I was wondering how they're dealing with the wreck chassis and getting back into the series. I spoke to Ricardo Junkos specifically this week for the piece that I wrote on Daily Sports Car the other day. There's a bit of uncertainty around that programme. He's working extremely hard to make sure that comes back next year. But he had a really honest and frank conversation with me for probably about half an hour, 45 minutes, about the challenges he's faced this year. It's fair to say he's done a lot of learning, because this is very different from what he's done in Indy Lights and some of the stuff he's done single seaters out in America. There were a lot of problems that he was faced with, particularly commercially. He didn't expect, and that sort of surrounds things like trying to get drivers on board, signing them for a full season, trying to get sponsors on board for a new championship. It's not easy, and it's not easy if you're in a championship that you're new to, that you're not necessarily out there fighting for wins immediately. It's difficult to get any sort of momentum. So right now, we don't know whether they'll be back beyond Petit Le Mans. He's committed certainly to Petit Le Mans. They're currently talking about getting a third driver on board in the next week or two. That's their biggest challenge that they're facing right now, is making sure they can field that car for the full race at Road Atlanta. It's kind of sad in a way, because this is a guy who's really passionate,
absolutely, and
really has a fantastic group of guys behind that program who are all, shall we say, a little bit not demotivated, but they're a bit sort of worn down from the challenges they've faced this season. They've written off the chassis. They haven't had the results they thought they were going to get. They've had to change drivers throughout the seaing. And
which is always a really tough part of this. If you're
it's underestimated how plug and play these drivers are.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the reality here is, if you've not got that consistency of data, if you've not got that consistency of response, consistency of performance, that can be a real challenge. Look, I've said before on the Weekend Sports Cars that the contribution to the overall international scene of these professional race teams is massively underrated, I think, by an awful lot of race organisers. By the way, I mean that as opposed to a factory-backed team. And it would be a big blow, I think, if a team like Junkos weren't able to find a package to take it forward. We wish them well.
Certainly do. Dan Fly's up next on Twitter. Says, how much of the At The Track team for Core's factory Porsche program are factory Porsche personnel? Are the engines built in Europe and delivered ready to install? Can you share anything on how these type of factory contracts work?
Right. Every contract differs. The answer, generally speaking, for the Porsche factory programs is, look, every Porsche factory GTE car is built at Porsche Motorsport. All their engines are built at Porsche Motorsport. The critical functions of those cars will be monitored and managed by Porsche technicians and engineers, but there will be the majority of the numbers, if you like, involved in running those cars will be the core guys. It'll be the core automotive guys, with more than a smattering of Porsche professionals in there managing the important functions of those cars.
Mark Cardella on Twitter says, with the WC not providing an opportunity for DPI to race at Le Mans, why doesn't IMSA drop the I for version 2.0 and just go back to calling them Daytona prototypes?
My understanding was the I was always on the basis that we're based on P2 chassis, which is an international global chassis. So I think that's why they were called DPI in the first place. Honestly, it's up to IMSA what they call them. The honest answer here is it's been a successful formula for them to this point. It's got brand recognition. Sort of, why would you change?
John Daniels on Facebook says, what's the status of the Rick Ware racing program in LMP2? Supposedly they're going to be entering some cars in IMSA.
I have a bit of information about the Rick Ware programme, which we will be featuring on Daily Sports Car probably early next week. But the answer is that is live. I'm aware of parts of the proposed package, with the IMSA entry potentially for Rick Ware Racing in 2020 in the IMSA WeatherTech Sports Car Championship. So yes, it's a thing. Exactly how that's going to look, I think is not yet fully formed. They've also announced, of course, their LMP2 programme in the Asia Le Mans series. That one is more fully formed, with a couple of JSP2 Ligiers and the involvement of Antonio Ferrari's Euro International squad. But I hope we can nail down a bit more detail and then share some of that with our readers and hopefully the readers of Racer.com as well in the coming days.
Brandon Bird on Facebook says, could another manufacturer, perhaps who's looking at DPI 2.0, buy the Nissan DPIs from Core and run them as their own, or is that a homologated package only as a Nissan?
The answer is they'd have to rework them, and for DPI it requires, from memory, approval from IMSA. So the look of the car would have to have some brand recognition for whatever brand it is, and of course you're not going to be able to run an Nissan engine in the rear of a car that you're calling something other than a Nissan. It's got to have a manufacturer moniker attached to it, and it's got to have styling cues that are approved by IMSA to do so. So if, for the sake of arguing, for whatever reason you might want to run it as, I don't know, a Ligier Alfa Romeo, it needs to have an engine that is badged as an Alfa Romeo, and it needs to have styling cues on that car that are specifically Alfa. I recall the Nissan original design was turned down, and that they were told to go away and come back with something that looked a bit more like a Nissan when the original programme was put together by ESM.
Another question from Brandon on Facebook says, given the healthy turnout at the IMSA Rolex reunion a few weeks ago, is there any hope of seeing historic IMSA cars running, or even just doing Duro laps during a standard race weekend? Well, they do it Rolex, don't they? The Rolex 24.
They do the 24 minutes of Daytona, which is organised by Tim Prendergast and his fabulous team.
And they get some serious cars.
Oh, I get some serious cars.
I mean, lay them out in the paddock. It's awesome.
For me, I think historic cars at a contemporary race meeting are always a good thing. You know, we had once this season with the Monza, with the Masters Endurance Legends, and, you know, generally speaking, for you and I, when there's a sport race on, that's the point at which we either go and do some work or whatever. But no work got done when those cars were on track. We're too busy actually just licking the windows. So the sights, the sounds, the smells. But that's enough about the inside of the DSC Fun Bus. They're fabulous cars, and it's great to see them out there. And yes, I think that would be a great part of the show, certainly for the bigger races for IMSA. The problem and it's a nice problem to have if you're IMSA, is they've got such a packed programme. I mean, there is. I think there are few packages on earth as impressive as what IMSA actually roll out in terms of their sanctioned series. And obviously there's a rolling programme where you've got kind of Super Trofeo, you've got the Porsche One Make series, you've got Pilot Challenge, you've got the Prototype Challenge. It's great to see that. I'd like to see something historic out there, because I just think their heritage is fantastic. Whether or not it's the GTPs, the GTUs, the GT, I mean, they've got so many fabulous cars out there, and owners that I think would love to have people come and see them, hear them in particular, watch them, and it would be good to see some form of spin-off, if you like, of the Endurance Legends format making its way stateside.
There is a good community, isn't there, of guys who run and race historic sports cars, because the HSR events get some really good entries.
Like Tim Prendergast and Joe Bradley regularly commentating on some fabulous events that sadly don't attract very big crowds. I think that there's room for that scene to grow. It's a fast-growing scene in Europe. It'd be interesting to see what could be done by IMSA if they can see the opportunities that might present them.
Let's go to General.
Let's do General.
And there's plenty of questions here about Suzuka. Lots of questions about your interview with Stefan Rattel in particular. Before we get into that, I think it'd be good, in light of what we did last weekend with Marshall, talking about his experience at the Rotary Union, give us a little bit of an insight into what Suzuka was like for your notes at your first time at the circuit. What did you think of the event, the race?
Full of Japanese people, which really surprised me. It was absolutely loads of Japanese people there. But no, first time at Suzuka for me, so something like 10th time in Japan, but always been to Fuji with either WEC or Asian Le Mans, or on one occasion both. The facility is magnificent, there's no doubt about that. As you often find when you go to an international racetrack for the first time, you find that the elevation of the circuit is a surprise, and Suzuka was a big surprise. Lots of elevation involved in that circuit. Some very familiar parts of it, the Ferris wheel, for instance, very familiar. A good crowd, although I think they were probably disappointed with the final crowd numbers there. I don't think it was quite what they expected.
Is that because of the weather?
It was
really bad.
It was blisteringly hot for the first 3 days I was there. We had one day where track action was almost washed out with just torrential rain, and then back to pretty warm temperatures for race day. But a good event, I think. As that settles in, it's an event, of course, with a proud history as a 1,000-kilometre race now, re-establishing itself as a 10-hour race. I think it will grow. I think it needs to find its own place in what is a pretty packed, Japanese domestic scene and Japanese kind of lineup of international races. But it strikes me as being a perfectly worthy addition to the Intercontinental GT Challenge, alongside Bathurst, of course, Spa, and then the problem that is the North American side of things, which will become the race in Indianapolis next year, and then the one that we're hoping to get you on, the big silver bus with wings to Kiawami, the 9 hours for that in November.
So let's kick off with some questions now that centre around that. We'll start off with Ed Horace on Facebook. He says, Graham, about the Stefan Rattel interview, I have to admire his clearly stated vision, but when he talked about the production minimums for GT3, did he seem aware that that one of the companies like to have trouble in that area was the host for the weekend, Honda? Is the NSX going to make the cut? And if it doesn't, does the Suzuka IGTC race continue without it?
I think the Honda looks to me to be close to being fine. I mean, but the what we're talking about here is that homologation in GT3 requires 20 cars within 2 years to be produced, and I believe sold as well. I think that's what the intention is. So unless someone does the kind of Porsche 917, build the 20 and stack them up, there's no business case to do that you have to build and sell those cars. I don't think Honda are a million miles away from that. They're well into double figures, and they've got a little wee while yet to nail down those sales. I think they're going to be okay. The ones I'm more worried about, and bearing in mind it is the current homologation, not every car you've built since you called it that, Nissan looked to be a little bit on the edge. There's not huge numbers. We had 4 Nissan GTRs competing in the Suzuka 10 Hours, but only 2 to the current specification, and those 2 were 2 of 4 that KCMG have fielded this year, one of which was destroyed in the dreadful accident that we saw at the Nürburgring 24 Hours. But I think they are, if they're at double figures, they're only just. The 2 that I think are in trouble are Lexus, which I think are well into its single figures. Certainly there's not huge numbers of those cars breaking through, and Callaway with the Corvette, that again we had a single car there, but there's tiny numbers there too, so they may well be the cars that there's trouble getting to the 20 cars within 2 years of the current homologation. I think Bentley are fine. McLaren are obviously towards the end of their first year, but we know they're at something like 13, and I'm absolutely aware of at least one more high profile customer to come for those cars, so I think they look like they'll be fine for the 20. We'll wait and see, but the 2 that at the moment I have my eye on as mainstream manufacturers are Nissan and Lexus, plus Callaway I think are in trouble as an homologated GT3 car. Whether or not they get the opportunity to continue something like ADAC GT Masters or elsewhere is a different matter, but as an FIA homologated car, they're simply not selling enough.
Well, I was going to say, is it clear yet what happens if a manufacturer doesn't meet those required numbers? You lose your homologation
as GT3.
So does that mean any existing customers can't run those cars from that point onwards?
It's a good
question. Can you run those cars out?
It's a good question. I suspect the answer is they might well be in trouble. There might well be a grandfathering period for those cars, but you might well be in trouble.
Daniel O'Donnell is on with the next question on Twitter. He says, I enjoyed your Stefan Mattel interview, Graham. Do either of you on the podcast see SRO introducing a GT4 Endurance Championship? 3-hour races on the same weekend as the current Endurance Series would be great, in my opinion.
We'll wait and see. I mean, it's a maturing marketplace. Remember, generally speaking, there's 2 reasons why you go for GT4. One is budget, the other one is experience. We've got GT4 cars, of course, competing in long-distance endurance and things like 24H Series and VLN, where they're going over those kind of... At the moment, I think SRO are pretty happy with what they've got in terms of principally sprint championships for them, but you do have GT4 cars in 2 and 3 hour races, for instance, in British GT. So it'll be interesting to see how things actually pan out, particularly as the numbers continue to grow, and I think GT4 will continue to grow. Very strong numbers for GT4, not all of which are actually racing, many of which are actually being used as track day weapons.
I think we're all in agreement, aren't we, Graham, that what SRO needs is more championships in more places.
I think we're sadly lacking in that. I think part of the interview was talk to Stefan about actually something I thoroughly admire him for, which is his entire World Challenge, which obviously covers Asia, Europe, North America, plus Blancpain Endurance, plus the IGTC, plus everything else. Not one clash on his calendar with the principal events he's actually got. I think it's 26 weekends and no clashes across them. So you've got to admire him for that. The fact that it clashes with other things is a different matter. But yes, you're absolutely right. The point you're making is that we've seen this rapid expansion in the number of championships and therefore the number of events. So there's no shortage of places where people can race a GT4 or GT3 car.
Ryan Terpstra on Twitter says, Graham, appreciate the interview with Stefan Mattel. It was an interesting perspective. That said, we all agree the IGTC race at Indianapolis won't work. Where and when, me personally, will the IndyCar finale weekend... sorry, this doesn't make sense to me. Where and when, me personally, IndyCar finale weekend at Watkins Glen early October. I think he means...
That might be a
good solution.
Might
be a bit missing.
If Stefan is absolutely aware that if he wants the Intercontinental GT Challenge to keep its moniker, that he's got to find a solution. He hopes in North America or the Americas. IGTC, we had an on and off the record conversation about Indianapolis. I've asked him on the record about crowd numbers and about the sustainability. It may well be that actually that is a race that they are prepared to basically say, as long as he's got the numbers on track, it's commercially viable. If he can attract as they did at Suzuka, the business-to-business marketplace. In other words, that the manufacturers can invite people to their hospitality for whatever activation they might want to do. We had cars launched at Suzuka in the Japanese market by Audi, and I believe by AMG as well. Then it may not need a crowd to be a commercially sustainable operation. The key to it is that he has his intercontinental customers, the manufacturer teams, the manufacturer customer racing teams, coming back for more. It doesn't necessarily need 40,000 people in the grandstand.
Got a couple of questions now regarding the commentary team at the Suzuka 10 Hours. Okay. One from Right Turn Lover, one from Douglas Holzman.
Is it sharply critical?
Yes. Yes is the answer. So Right Turn Lover says, what do you think Suzuka 10 hour commentary?
Right. What's the other question?
The other question is, what do you... No, it says, Graham and Marshall, commentary is difficult, but the addition of Sam Collins to the Suzuka 10 hour race helped the broadcast, but with the rest of the group I found it challenging to listen to. I say we should get a change.org going for both of you to do the commentary with Sam for next year's race. What do you think?
Right, first things first, it's really important to say this. I haven't heard it because, of course, I was there and it's geo-plugged in Japan, so we didn't have the opportunity to listen to it. I have, however, had reaction by email, by message, and indeed by conversation with a number of people, including one of the race organisers. And it is fair to say that there was a degree of, how can I put this, being rather less than impressed with the quality of what was being doled out. It's not the first time, of course. The first year, I think it rather caught the race organisers flat-footed, and they provided something that, frankly, was just not fit for purpose. I can only say this. Number one, commentary is difficult. It is not a simple matter to talk knowledgeably and in an entertaining fashion for 3, 4, 6, 8, 11 or 12 hours in the case of a broadcast for the Suzuka 10 hours.
It's certainly not easy to do that with a new team of people that you've not worked before at an event you've never worked at before.
Indeed. However, there is little or no defence for coming along and not being prepared. The entry list for that race was known weeks before, and you've got to come in and know who it is that's competing, and know the background, and know the figures, and know the rule book, and know what the opportunities are for success or failure. You've got to understand the BOP, you've got to understand the fact that you've got different classes, you've got to understand that you've got different teams with different agendas. It seems to me, from what was actually being relayed back from numerous people, many of whom's position I respect, that was not the case. And all I'd say there is the individuals concerned, they need to look at their own performance. I'm not going to offer criticism because I haven't heard it. But if it's what I've been told that it was, I'd just say this. Guys, you need to go and look at what you did, what you didn't do, where that went right, where that went wrong, and be honest with yourselves and everybody else, and make sure it doesn't happen again. Because if you're looking to build an international event, it needs everything to be right. And if the TV commentary isn't correct, you're not going to build an international audience. You want to see how to do it right? Look at what happened with Bathurst, look at what happened with the Dubai 24 Hours, and full kudos here to the Radio Show Limited team for what they brought to both those events. Those both were raised another level by providing a quality of commentary. And I should say, by the way, I'm not ringing my own bell here, because I was a Johnny-come-lately to both of those events. Pleased to be part of what happened in the years that followed, but the big heavy lifting there was done by people turning up, and for that matter, by the way, the GT World crew that SRO provide internationally, where they come along.
Those plug-in and play as the rest of the SRO, aren't they?
Yeah, as long as John Watson, learns a few more names properly, then absolutely fine. The reality is, it's a tough job. You don't come into it lightly. You never ever should, and those that do are pretty rapidly exposed.
Kevin Kemp on Twitter says, Graham, after hearing Stefan Rattel's explanation of the over-regulation on pit stops, do you still think these regulations are necessary? # me personally, I still don't like them. Can't they just mandate a brake change and standard refuelling rigs for all cars and let them race?
I should explain exactly what this was. Regular listeners will not be unaware about my loathing for the over-regulation of some of the kind of the races that we cover. So I asked him some pretty blunt questions, and he gave me some actually really good answers. And I would urge people, if you're interested in this aspect of it, to listen to what Stefan had to say. It was a remarkably open and a lucid series of explanations. And yes, I counterpunched by saying, but yes, shouldn't we still be rewarding excellence? I think it's still a bit of an open book. I absolutely 100% respect the answers that he gave me. I absolutely still believe that we've not got the balance correct, and that we need to introduce an aspect that encourages excellence on the team front to it. So, oddly, politically as a natural liberal with a small L, you'd seem to think, people seem to think that means you'd kind of embrace regulation. I embrace sensible regulation. I certainly don't embrace over-regulation. I completely see where Stefan was coming from, and there's aspects of it that I agree with, but I still think we've ended up in a place that people don't really want to be, which is a race that it just has too many corners. And I don't mean that physically on the track. I mean it's there's too many pages in a rule book for me.
Let's. I'll just quickly point out that Matthias Longo asked roughly the same question there, so we did read that.
I can answer it again if you like.
Yeah, you could answer it again.
I give a completely different answer.
I'd rather watch paint dry. Anyway, fun. Let's get to the final section.
Fun's always a good thing.
There are only 2 questions left.
Not much fun then.
No, not much fun today. Peter Bester on Twitter says, this is a light-hearted one, what is the best, sort of not known for years about, and worst, got caught straight away, examples of cheating you've ever seen in motorsport?
You've got to go a long way to go better than Toyota back in the World Rally Championship and the heavily engineered overboost function they put into the Celica. If you're not aware of this one, please go and look it up.
I'm not aware of this one, actually.
You're not? No, they got hammered. They were banned for a long time for that one. But this was I'm trying to remember exactly how it worked, but it was basically, it would only operate when the engine was operating in certain kind of conditions. But basically, if you looked at it and you examined it really rather closely, it looked like a solid piece, but it wasn't. That under basic load it would open up, and
that's amazing.
Yeah, but I think they got a 2-year ban for international competition for that one.
Really?
Oh yeah, huge. But that for me, there's all sorts of other legends about nitrous systems plugged into roll cages and underscale NASCARs and God knows what else. But there's all sorts of things that kind of catch people out. There's some absolute corkers. I think Marshall wrote a piece about this on Racer some little while ago. It's just caught. I think there was something there. I think there was, the MP did write something for Racer. So do Google that one, or just use the search function on racer.com and you'll find it. But look, you can't. There's something massively admirable about a criminal level of cunning, and that was particularly naughty. But it's an odd thing, even if you really respect the rule book, there's sort of level of admiration for doing it that well, but then getting caught.
Yeah, and it's hard in terms of ones that got caught straight away recently. That there's so many. We're just flooded, aren't we, at the moment, with teams getting disqualified and excluded from races. Most of it's not people genuinely trying to cheat.
It's people being edgy.
Yeah, or not quite knowing the rules perfectly in some cases.
Well, it's for me, it's the kind of, I think that's the other part of the picture we're just talking about, the kind of over-regulation. To be honest with you, there's over-regulation, and then there's an over-reliance on post-race decision-making and the importance of stewards and technical. I'd just like to see an era of common sense here. I'd just like to see a moment in time where we consider, do you really want us to be here till 3 o'clock in the morning poring over whether or not that kind of 1/9 of a millimetre on the skid plate is really an important enough issue to disqualify somebody from an international motor race? Do we really want to do that? I think we could do with... There's that fantastic phrase, the Age of Enlightenment. I'd like to see somewhere between the age of enlightenment and the age of bullshit, and somewhere in the middle where everything kind of comes together and we can all agree, yeah, okay, on balance, fair dues, let's let that one fly. And I think people at the moment, it seems we've got this moment of terror where anything that is even on the edge of the rules is seen as being, let's edge towards caution. Come on, let's edge towards competition, let's edge towards doing what racers do. And I'd like to see the bluff call from people who, if the call there is, but hang on a minute, we might be challenged on that. We might actually find ourselves in a position where that becomes an issue further down the line, and we might find ourselves part of some kind of liability claim. Come on, guys, it's motorsport. Come on, let's just get to the stage where competition rules. And if someone's over the line, and substantially over the line, let's kick their ass. Let's make sure that people realise they shouldn't be taking those decisions. But let's not punish people to such a degree for being on the line and finding themselves a tiny bit over. When we're talking about fractions of millimetres, I just cannot see that that's a good enough reason to remove a hard-won result over a 10, 12, 24-hour race.
Final question.
Wow.
Comes from Dean Moore on Facebook. Says, with John Bennett stepping down, you discussed the lack of AM drivers in DPI last week. If you could force any team owner / director into the driver's seat, who would it be? Roger Penske to Acura?
That'd be an interesting one, wouldn't it?
Martin Short. We would be. Oh no, he's
Martin Short. Martin's way too competitive. If Martin's listening, old if he's not. Hi, Martin. Who would you put into the car as an AM driver? That's a cracking question, isn't it? Just trying to work my way through.
Chip Ganassi, be a laugh, wouldn't it? If he could. I'm not going to
Chip Ganassi. I tell you what, downhill racing, you'd be bloody quick.
Not a hill climber.
No,
we're in the Pikes Peak. No.
So no Chip. Doonan might be quite good. I don't know how quick John Doonan is.
He's one of those people who's probably done so many laps in a Mazda MX-5 Cup car that he'd probably be quite good.
He probably would relish it, but he probably wouldn't like people to kind of realise that. But
so when you think about it, actually, there's a lot of team owners who you think, he has raced.
I'll tell you somebody who would be very, very good. Now it occurs to you, and the one that I would think that people would not want to see get into is Richard Dean. Richard, really very quick in his day, title-winning driver, multiple title-winning driver, British GT, Le Mans class winner, as late as 2006. For that matter, Lawrence Tomlinson at Ginetta, a highly competitive man. I've seen him barrel roll a Ginetta like no other man alive. But he, back in the day, in a TVR and a Panos, for that matter, in his Ginetta Sidetech. And by the way, all those three cars on display this weekend at Silverstone. I think that could be quite an interesting one. That'd be quite fun as a challenge race, wouldn't it?
What about Amato Ferrari?
Who knows? He
could be sneakily good, couldn't he?
Yeah, I never get through the I remember some years ago looking for an interview with Amato, and Amato famously never gives interviews. And Matt Griffin saying, see me in the garage and saying, he'd say, Amato. He says, Amato. He says, you've got more chance of actually getting an audience with the Pope. And I think it is a bit like that. But he could be very good.
Yeah, actually, I've just thought of it. Stuart Cox from our GoPro race.
That's enough from me. I think Stuart would be massively competitive.
The radio would be hilarious.
That would be a YouTube video, wouldn't it? That right there.
You thought Kimi Räikkönen was funny.
Stand aside Kimi Räikkönen, Stuart Cox, and his notes to his engineer. I don't think there'd be a lot of listening going on, would there? But it would be funny. Stuart, we love you dearly. That's it this week from a truncated version, a slightly belated version. For again, we apologise, of the Week in Sports Cars. With me, Graham Goodwin, with you, Stephen Kilbey, and thanks again. Thanks to Ryan Kish as well for him putting the questions together. Thanks for the other man sitting in the room, by the way, quietly. You might have heard the rustling of the KFC bags coming in earlier. Adam Weller for fetching the dinner, which now about to devour in a way not seen previously since a caveman actually hacked into a woolly mammoth. with thanks again to the wonderful people at Cooper Tyres and the even more, I'm going to say it now out loud, even more wonderful people for the Justice Brothers. That's been the Week in Sports Cars this week. We'll be back with you next week, but look out for some other special programmes from the FIWC and some carryover coverage we've still got to air from the Suzuka 10 Hours. We'll see you next week.